Welcome to Tech Tuesday number 46. Today we're going to talk about how I look at the job of VPIP, and I'm going to tie in the issue of IP cycles. But first, let's take a moment of silence. We still have over 100 hostages. What I want to talk about today is what exactly is a VPIP, but I'm really using that as a stand-in for the different flavors of managing IP in companies. And I asked ChatGPT what ChatGPT thinks is a VPIP. And you can see here, it's the main figure responsible for safeguarding and leveraging the company's IP to create competitive advantages while reducing risks associated with IP issues. And if you look at the drawing, the way I see it is that the job of the VPIP is to look up and down and left and right. Up means communicating with the decision makers. Down, it's really not so down, but into the company. Communicating with different parts of the company regarding IP issues. But at the same time, VPIP is also in charge of sources of IP and uses of IP. So the way I call it is that the VPIP sets goals and vision and also context for IP. And all of this is used in order to inform IP-related processes, which we're going to talk about, and also in the other direction. In other words, processes are used to inform what the goals, vision, and context for the IP is. So the VPIP is in charge of coordinating with other company functions to see how IP can impact or be impact or work together for synergy with whatever they're doing in these other departments. The VPIP is also in charge of unified IP activities across departments. And I just gave an example. If you have a company like perhaps Nike, who have patents and they have trademark and they wield them together. So theoretically, the person in charge of coordinating these different IP activities is a VPIP. Now, the reason why it's VP and not just, director of IP, because a VP is actually advising at the level of the company strategy, not just different departments. So one last thing that the VPIP does is that she is in charge of IP awareness. Okay, she's a function in the company that's supposed to be aware of IP. So what's IP? The context, why things are happening, the IP landscape, what IP other people have, competitors, IP awareness both inside the company and awareness of what's happening outside, and of course, not only what's happening now, but also what's possible or likely in the future. So this is part one of what a VPIP maximally does. Part two, I want to note that IP is everywhere in the company. So the VPIP is usually responsible for things that are not actually under her direct control. And here's an example. Managing the trade secrets of other companies which license their trade secrets to your company. Okay, so the people who are going to use or abuse these trade secrets are not in the IP department. Another example is creation of IP outside the company. Again, the VPIP usually doesn't have control over research in these places. And last but not least, the VPIP gives critical input to other departments in the company, and it's easy to ignore the VPIP because it's not under her control. And because of this, I really highlight three different tracks for the VPIP to consider. One is the issue of IP culture and training. In other words, you need to have the people cooperate with you and with the idea of IP. The second one, as a VP, you set policies and you make sure they happen. And the third one is that a lot of the work of the VPIP is being involved in processes that relate to IP, but at key points. So you have to identify the key points and make sure you're there when they happen. Another thing which is different between the IP and other departments of the company is that the range of potential scenarios that you need to consider or that you can consider is usually bigger than other departments. And one of the reasons is because writing new IP is much cheaper than building a factory or starting a marketing campaign. So it's easier to have more of them. And of course, the VPIP might actually have a department that not only helps the VPIP do everything I said, but also pure IP activities like licensing, prosecution, drafting, whatever, litigation. Some companies have a huge licensing portfolio or a lot of litigation activity, and therefore the IP department will be very significant. I was thinking how to describe the different levels of what the VPIP does, and I thought it might be interesting to look at it as a cake. Now, food in general, if it's very special food, it has layers of flavors. Also, the job of the VPIP has different layers. The first one is structure. Which parts in the company do what? When you build the company or when you have relationships with other companies, that is a C-suite executive function, and the VPIP needs to provide input into this. Are we going to do R&D in-house, or are we going to out-license it, outsource it? Well, there's a very important IP consideration, so the VPIP needs to be involved. Policies, okay? Setting up policies and tracking that the policies work and adapting them, that's a classic managerial position, task. Planning. You all know that in IP, the process is sometimes slow and you can be stuck with whatever you set out to do 5 years ago. So there's planning functions like strategy, budget, input to other strategies, support of individual strategies of each one of the departments. In other words, the RD strategy, the marketing strategy, each one of them could benefit from input from IP. Part of planning is preparing contingency plans. And as was noted recently on LinkedIn, you have multiple timescales happening at the same time. Years, months, and days can happen simultaneously. Of course, like any managerial position, you're in charge of execution and monitoring that the execution is happening. This job is exciting, which means you always have events and you have to react to them. Some of the events are what I call benign. Somebody wants to do an M&A and they want to write a contract which talks about ownership of IP. Okay, that's an event. You didn't plan it ahead of time. Initiative. One of the important jobs of the VPIP is to identify opportunities that are either created or enhanced by IP and bring them to the proper authorities. The flip side is preservation. VPIP wants a company to stay alive, which means that you have to identify and do something about vulnerabilities, which are more structural, risks, which are things that happen, and uncertainties, which are things that you don't even know if or will might happen. I want to thank Efrat Azulay-Nevo in the podcast that I have with Dr. Ilan Ries. She pointed out that one of the very important jobs of the IP function is making sure that you have culture, the right IP culture. And you can look at it as that the IP is actually part of the product that the company is making. Unfortunately, a lot of companies either not aware of IP or they have negative IP awareness. You know, IP costs money, it interferes with our job, it's complicated, it delays things. Or even if it's not negative, it's just foreign, you know, different. It works in different timelines, it has different rules, it's very esoteric. What is this? Obviousness, priority, poisonous divisional. It's invisible, and if it's invisible, it's easy to not be aware. And last but not least, people believe that IP is not part of the product. Well, IP is part of the product, but it's the job of the VPIP to make sure that everybody understands that. So the VPIP has to be involved in a lot of places where she doesn't have much control. How can we look at it? Well, what we don't want to do is looking only at the IP department. Okay, sometimes you see a company where the IP function is mainly looking at IP. Oh, we're going to get another patent, or should we file another 2 patents, or maybe not? And sometimes it gets crumbs thrown to it, and that's what it does. Okay, remember, I said it has to show initiative. And while it's absolutely true that IP activity includes foraging, you know, going around looking for inventions, going around making sure that the people in the company will tell you what's happening. It's true, but that's not the main thing that the IP function does. Instead, let's look at it from the lowest level of involvement to the highest level. The lowest level is simply providing information or advice. Yeah, that's patentable. Here's a number of a patent attorney you can go to. The higher level is creating or providing tools to work with these things. And if you provide a tool, you should usually provide instructions how to do it. And that also includes writing a patent. So if I have the R&D department and they say we have a great invention and we want to protect it, I could just say, well, here's a patent attorney. Or I can say, I'll make sure that you get a patent that provides the protections that you need, and afterwards the instructions, and here's how you should be using the patent. Next high level is sharing the burden. And above that is providing some of the thinking function or sensitivity function that these other parts of the company are supposed to do. In particular, the issues of sensitivity to opportunities and vulnerabilities is something that in the field of IP, other departments don't really know how to do, and you should be providing so. Now, one of the reasons why you need to have involvement is because thinking about IP is difficult, so people avoid it. So what you need to have is have an excellent connection with the people who should be thinking about IP. And even if what you want to do is do co-thinking with them, they still need to be well connected with you. Chris Kegler suggested feeding them. Not exactly what he said, but if you take people out to lunch it definitely develops informal reports and also allows you to talk to them about IP, perhaps in a less painful way. There are other ways as well, I'm sure. So I'm going to talk a second about the sharing, the burden, and the other co-activities. In most companies, the other top level executives don't really appreciate what they can do for, with, or to, in a negative sense, IP. And even if they do, well, startups always deal with something novel. So what they know might be generic and not specific for what the company wants. So first, let's turn necessity into a virtue by helping them do these activities. We have an excuse for continuing to talk to them. If you don't talk to the other departments, they can do terrible anti-IP activities. And by talking to them all the time, you know what's happening, and it keeps the VPIP in the loop. It also allows you to do IP training and IP coaching. You know, if you're always talking, each time you talk, you can drop another point, and slowly people build awareness of trade secrets, for example. By doing part of the work, it gives you an opportunity to perhaps change the policies in different departments so that whatever is related to IP can actually work. The very fact that you do some of the work makes it clear that IP is a benefit and not just, you know, a task. And maybe super important, it helps the IP, the VPIP, understand what's going on in the company. So in a sense, what I'm saying is it's a VPIP acts a lot as an outside consultant. There's different definitions of that word, but one type of consultant comes, gives a 2-hour talk and leaves. And the other type of consultant actually helps you prepare the forms and analyze the data and so on. So the VPIP should be the second type. And I want to emphasize, if it wasn't clear yet, most of the processes that the VPIP should be part of are not formally IP processes. Okay, if marketing department wants to come out with a newsletter, they don't see that as an IP activity at all. Of course, when they publish the important invention that wasn't filed yet, then yes, then it turns out that it was an IP activity. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you multiple different departments and how the VPIP can interact with these different departments. The first thing to remember is that different departments have different needs, and what I'm going to talk about now is super generic, and it has to be adapted to the particular situation you're at. One of the points you should be looking at is when I say different departments have different needs, sometimes it's a structural issue, okay? If we have a company that doesn't do in-house R&D, that's a structural problem that has to be dealt with, but sometimes you have operational issues. Right now, there's a problem that a competitor is trying to make a competing product. So let's look here for the working together at the operational relationships. Trivial one is creating IP. The department is creating IP, and the VPIP wants to make sure that that IP is created and owned and so on by the company. Second, the department is using or could be using IP. Third, the department, and this is unfortunately too common, could be abusing IP. And last, the department might have an IP-related vulnerability that by using IP they're not aware of, but if they were aware of, they would act differently. So the question is always, how do we want the department to think about IP? And the answer should be that the VPIP should know what processes happen in the company, identify the key points, explain how IP fits in, and also make sure that the people in the company, or at least the correct executives, are trained to understand that IP is relevant and why it's important at that point. Let's start with the first player, that's the C-suite. Okay, so in a typical flow, we have a chief executive officer, and they generate a vision or strategy for the company, and they give that to the C-suite to give feedback, and they change it. And the minute you know what the strategy or vision of the company is, that should affect your IP. In addition, or vice versa, you have plans. Each one of the departments puts together plans. Well, these plans are affected or affect IP. So if we look at it from the considerations I said before, when you have a vision or strategic moves or tactical moves, all of these suggest IP, at least they suggest to me, and you can decide what to do with them or explain to C-suite what they could do. If you have IP, your plans and strategy can be based either on your IP or on your risks or weaknesses. All of these plans can include moves that damage IP or prevent IP creation. You have to be aware. Some of them have terrible risk, like infringement. And most important, if you work correctly, you have synergy. For example, you can get a better strategy if it takes into account IP. If you have a better company structure, your long-term IP prospects can be better. And we have a great example in Apple. Apple, or maybe Apple is not the best example, but a lot of companies like Apple who act as a platform. Okay, the App Store is a platform. If you do it correctly, you can use that platform in order to obtain forward-looking data about what's important and what's not. And I'm pretty sure Apple does that too. And use it in order to inform what IP you should be writing and how you should make sure that you have, freedom to operate or other things. So this is a very common behavior of big companies that provide a platform, also little companies. But it only works if you have the IP function working together with the planning function in order to understand what data you have, what you need, and where you can go. Marketing. So obviously, marketing creates trademarks. It creates use flows. I mean, if you have a product, the marketing department tells everybody how the product should be used. Marketing department can also create requests for features or for invention. They say, oh, we want to say we can do such and such. Please do R&D, which will allow us to do such and such. And the way I portray this is we have a market. The market has needs. These needs get into R&D. Other people's IP also gets into onto R&D. We use all of this information, marketing needs, what we know how to do in order to do marketing activities, which we direct at customers or potential customers. And they, of course, can modify the market. And again, marketing can be IP negative. They publish secrets. They publish future goals. And once they do that, you won't get good IP. Marketing can definitely admit you're infringing, or perhaps even recommend to your customers that they should be infringing. There are other risks as well. But marketing has a great opportunity to work together with IP. Remember, IP is about what other people can and cannot do, or may not do. And you can use marketing in order to promote that. For example, if you have IP protected technology, marketing can take advantage of that says patented, but also marketing can be used to make your patent more important. Because if everybody wants to do it, the patent's more valuable. And one of the interesting type of strategy of synergy is when you build a story that's relevant both for marketing and for the IP people about the IP protected features. So marketing, when they tell a story about why your product is so wonderful, they want to focus on what's protected because that's what the competition is not allowed to do. IP people, when they want to make the IP more valuable, either for investors or even when you're talking to patent office, if you have a story which ties together the features and explains why they're valuable, you got a good thing going for you. Some companies have a separate department that does business intelligence. Sometimes it's spread out, and sometimes it's under the IP department. I mentioned in the past that things having to do with deception also need a place. But when you do business intelligence and you get information about competition or about opportunities, one of the things that happens very naturally is that you can identify holes in your protection or holes or opportunities that other people want, and the IP function should be very happy to block them. You want to use IP in order to set up the competition. And sometimes what you want to do is you use IP, you come out with an announcement, which is IP related, and you see how the competition reacts to that announcement. And that can also give you some interesting business information. And in the negative sense, if you want to prevent your competitors from having business information, controlling trade secrets better, which is in a sense VPIP function, will help do that. If you use business intelligence and you discover somebody's infringing you, but you don't do anything about it, that could interfere with your ability to get an injunction, get back damages, and sometimes even sue. There's a risk. You can do business intelligence and see patterns of the competition and discover that you're infringing. You can also contaminate your own IP. One simple way is if business intelligence tells us what other people are doing, R&D might decide to copy that. Oops, there's a patent. In some companies, business intelligence includes collecting secret information about other companies. And if you use it, that is called misuse of trade secrets or trade secret misappropriation, and you can be sued for it. And if you actually use that information in your IPs, then your IP, your patents could be damaged. Now, some people use IP as a main source for business intelligence, which is easy because it's published and so on, but it shouldn't be the main source. It's an important source. If only because it's usually 1.5 years behind, and because if you have a competent VPIP on the other side, then what you read in the patents is at the very least subtly wrong, and if they're even better, it's completely deceptive. Companies that have a product often have a product management function. So the PM is always creating new features and new uses, which obviously IP. The other hand, if you provide a white space map of where there's protection of what people are doing, the product management can aim the product development in the direction of the white space, which of course reduces chance of infringement and might also allow them to make something novel. Product management has a very easy time abusing IP. They can forget to tell the VPIP about key features and they're not protected. They can protect only initial ideas instead of more fully developed ideas. It's a deep subject, but let's assume you wanted to protect more fully developed ideas, or they can just publish. They can expose trade secrets inside the product itself, especially if they're not aware. And of course, product management is a function which will be doing infringement. And it is a function which will forget to tell you what version 2.0 is, and then you'll discover later on that version 2.0 infringes and has other IP problems. If product management uses agile type development methods, you might have contamination. You have an embedded user giving you advice. Well, that embedded user, what they invent might not belong to you. And interesting synergy opportunity. IP can say where we're more likely to get a patent, and product management will say where we're more likely to make money, and together design features that are simultaneously both more likely to make money and more likely to prevent competition from copying. Customer-facing functions, for example, sales or customer service, they're creating IP all the time. They just don't know it. Every time they talk to a customer, every time you talk to a potential customer and try to sell a product, you discover what individual customers need. Okay, it's not market needs, it's what individual customers need. What feature do they want? They can use IP when they describe the product while selling it, saying, oh, we have this unique feature. Why is it unique? Because we have IP. It's patented. That implies that it's wonderful. They can abuse very easily by publication, admitting infringement, or IP ownership contamination, meaning an invention comes from a customer and somehow finds its way into R&D, and that's too late now. And one of the synergistic ways that customer-facing functions and IP function work together is in helping identify what features should be protected. But not only in your system, also in the competitor system. Okay, when you try to sell a customer product, they're going to tell you, oh, I don't want to buy yours, I want to buy the competition. Competition has feature A. So first of all, sales will tell VPIP, feature B appears interesting, and they're going to say, the competitor is using feature A. Can you, Mr. IP or Mrs. IP, help me prevent the competitor from selling feature A? And the answer is often yes. Very important function of IP is working with outside entities. And I put here together three completely different entities. One is when you do open innovation, which means that entities outside the company are doing part of the development, and maybe they're not even beholden to you. Partners that work together with you, and suppliers. So obviously IP will be created either by others or with others, and you have to control it. You use IP both to attract partners and to keep them with you. You use IP in order to pressure suppliers to work with you and to give you the price you want. And you can also use IP for licensing or other ways of controlling what the partner does. So not only they should come and not only they should stay with you, but they should also be doing what's good for you, or maybe what's bad for others. It's very easy to abuse IP with outside entities if it's not clear who owns something, or if you use IP wrongly against others. For example, if somebody in R&D tells a supplier, you're infringing our patent, that could be very unpleasant. Because maybe they're not infringing, maybe they are infringing, but the minute you involve the IP lawyers, the entire dynamic changes. Risks. So ownership contamination, blocking. Blocking is when you can do version 1.0, but you can't do version 2.0 because downstream was already protected by somebody else. If somebody else is doing the R&D, or if you do in general, critical know-how and trade secrets can either leak or simply be lost because somebody else has them. Some of these partners have an interest to cancel your IP. Big problem is that you're friends now, but in 2 years you want to break up. But once you break up, they might leave with permission to do IP, to use your IP, which you definitely don't want. And of course, publication. Anybody who's worked with a university knows that the people they want to publish. Also in other companies. Controlling publication in your own company is really difficult. Controlling publication in other companies is way more difficult. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning the function of managing trade secrets of others. So here's the flip side. Other people are not managing your trade secrets. And we talked in the past about controlling the ecosystem using open innovation. And in general, you can reduce both IP costs and R&D costs if you do it correctly. In other words, if your outside partner is doing the R&D for you, it could be cheaper if you get exclusive rights. It could be very expensive if they don't even have to license it to you. There's a subject of knowledge management, which could be under the IP department or not. Depends how you look at IP. Is IP only the tool that gives you IP rights, or is IP the general idea of intangible assets? What I have here is a Nonaka model of how knowledge is created. And what's interesting about it is that you have steps where tacit knowledge, okay, turns into explicit knowledge and then back into tacit knowledge. Okay, so people know something, but they can't say it. But then when they work with somebody, they learn how to say it, and then you develop more knowledge, and again and again and again. So for sure, the VPIP needs to be involved. The VPIP needs to be aware that at these contact points where knowledge turns from know-how into trade secrets, put it one way, they have to be aware of it happening and harvest it or whatever they want to do. And this, of course, shouldn't distract us from the intimate relationship that IP has with R&D. Okay, R&D by its nature is creating new IP, and these changes of a knowledge type don't necessarily happen in R&D. So what happens in R&D? Well, surprisingly, R&D make new inventions. They also make scientific discoveries, which formally are not IP, but it's a very important input for the IP manager, VPIP. And they also identify problems, which really tells the VPIP where they should be aiming. R&D will definitely want to be licensing technology and IP from other people. R&D can abuse IP in the most difficult way, which is when they talk to the VPIP, they limit the scope to the product that R&D is making. Or they limit the scope to what is working commercially. Instead of telling you what the invention is, they limit it. Or they tell you, oh, it's trivial, so I didn't even talk to you about it. We could have a whole talk about the ways that R&D departments abuse IP people. The biggest risk is that R&D will create something which is infringing. A very important synergy is that when R&D comes to IP with some needs or solutions, IP awareness can help fine-tune both how they understand the needs and solutions, and also where you should be going with it. What I've done until now is I've said, what I think the VPIP function could, should, might do. And you might ask, well, how do I know if my VPIP, which, could be myself, is doing a good job? And this is especially true since we started off by saying that the IP function is one that most people are not familiar with, typically not your typical CEO. So here I have a suggestion of some questions that you can ask, which would help figure out if your VPIP function is operating correctly. The first one, I believe, is the most important. Do you have a clear case for the importance of IP issues? If you do, is the CEO able to articulate it? If the CEO is not able to articulate it, it means it's not getting enough IP awareness from the VPIP. In a more general sense, you should be able to explain how IP awareness is affecting what the company is doing. VPIP should definitely be able to explain how IP activities added value to the company in the past and obviously present, but also in the future. There should be feedback. There should be more than just feedback. VPIP should be able to explain what are the weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and risks, and how well is it handling them. Where are the opportunities, and how well is the VPIP taking advantage? The policies and culture. And the last one I think is most interesting, is the VPIP ignored, tolerated? In other words, if the VPIP comes into the room, they talk to them, or actually sought out, meaning that people are aware that there's IP issues and they go talk. And just skip to the end of the list. I believe the VPIP should be able to articulate how good the IP situation could be and how good it actually is. In other words, the best of all possible worlds is 100, and we're at 75, and here's why. But the very fact that they can say 75 out of 100 probably means something about the VPIP doing their job. You notice I didn't list here anything like how many patents are filed or how well trade secrets are recorded. That's down the list. Positive sense, the very existence of a VPIP position, it shows that the company believes that IP is important. And leads us to the question, okay, so what is the job of the outside patent attorney? Obviously, you get paid, you do something, but in addition, the VPIP is probably not doing all of these functions. Some of them, perhaps, if there is a VPIP, okay, some of them perhaps could be provided by an outside patent attorney. It would be useful if the outside patent attorney gives critique. Very difficult. One, everybody's worried about being fired, especially the patent attorney. He doesn't have a contract. And often the patent attorney doesn't know enough about what's happening inside the company in order to give coherent critique. Even if all the patent attorney is doing is drafting, it is very important. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of reflective practitioner. I recommend looking at it. But a reflective practitioner assumes that the client asking for something means the client needs something, and that the first step is in a dialogue together with the client, figuring out what the client really needs. Here the client would be the VPIP. One question that I think somebody needs to figure out is who decides how important IP is to the company, and therefore, what kind of commitment do you want to make? Now, because of all these different jobs, I prepared a summary table. I'm not sure that you will all agree with it, but not sure I agree with it, but it's a starting point. I listed different types of positions: VPIP, IP manager. IP contact means, an engineer who's in charge of also doing IP. Could be VP R&D, okay? A fractional IP person, who works 1 day a week, and an outside law firm who's, doing your IP. And what I distinguish between is how well they help you with the strategic side, how well they work inside and outside the company, and how easy it is to find a good one. So it's very easy to find a good outside firm. It just costs money. Yeah. And it is quite difficult to find a good VPIP that can really get into what you're doing. Here's some dilemmas for the VPIP. The first one is, should this position be data-driven, meaning we look at the big data and it tells you what to do, or should it be more event opportunity-driven? Of course, you could be both. But I personally believe that being data-driven can help you, but it's more likely to cause you to do IP theater. Oh, I put it into the big data and it said, here's the direction to go. So we filed 5 patents and the competition only has 3 patents. Another dilemma, the CEOs really, should all of the IP be under the responsibility of the VPIP? Now, even if you want to do that, it's difficult because trade secrets, for example, are everywhere. Another dilemma, this one is the VPIPs, should you allow the CEO to abdicate all of the IP responsibilities? Why, yes? Because, if you have a VPIP, so it's getting a lot of attention. But I think it's wrong for various reasons. One of them is when something bad happens, the CEO will have to be involved. And a dilemma that everybody has, how do we use IP tools, which are usually, very scary and threatening? I use the word against very carefully, entities that are both partners and competitors. Okay, so we once had an entity that was a partner and competitor, and when they got the letter saying that they were infringing, they said, we're not going to be a partner anymore. Okay, so it has to be the right way to do it. It's not easy. Summary. I recognize that VPIP can't do everything that I just listed. That means that you have to be very careful asking yourself where to put the effort. VPIP has to know a lot about the different company units, otherwise you can't do the job right. The position itself is very unique because of the combination of informality and strategic importance and lack of, direct power in general. And that's why I believe it's difficult to be a fractional VPIP, because you can't simultaneously have the intimacy that you need for the informal and the authority. And last but not least, and that's why I put that slide in, it's really difficult to tell if the VPIP is not doing what they should. To give you a feeling for where the VPIP job starts, somebody wants to open a new company which makes smart rings, and you're supposed to be the VPIP. So even before we open the company, what are the leading IP issues? Okay. How should we structure the company taking into account these IP issues? What do you think IP activities for the next 2 years are going to be? And now, can you identify non-generic IP policies? Not a policy like every inventor should fit in a form and give it in, and we're going to go to the patent committee. It has to be non-generic, tied specifically to that company. With that, I am stopping the recording.